Okay, so you want to know about the African music industry, right?
Yeah.
You've come to the right place.
Yeah, it's really taking off.
It is. We highlight the rise of popular genres like Afrobeats and Amapiano,
Yeah.
the success of African artists on international stages and streaming platforms, and the strategic investments and partnerships being made by both local and international music labels.
On that note, the raised questions are: what benefits do international label partnerships offer African artists?
How did African music achieve greater global recognition?
What challenges hinder African artists' career sustainability?
Why are international labels investing in African music?
This is exciting, so stay with us for this great insight by Afrotake article in conversation with me, Janine, and my co-host.
My name is Nate. This is all powered by Brand Blended Media, so stay tuned.
And the Grammy goes to Thames Let Me. Hey, hey.
Black coffee subconsciously.
And the Grammy goes to Water. Tyler.
He's a Grammy-winning sensation originally from Nigeria. Please welcome Burna Boy.
You know, it really feels like the sound of music is kind of changing, globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can't help but notice just how much of that energy, that new rhythm is coming straight out of the African continent, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this isn't just some fleeting trend. It really feels like African music is like genuinely changing the rules for the whole industry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we've got this like really cool set of sources, we've put together to really get to the bottom of what's happening.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. We're looking at, Monique Maddie's LinkedIn article, which kind of gives us a business-focused lens.
Right.
Then we've got reports from, CNBC Africa, African Leadership Magazine, all spotlighting that impressive growth. The rising international recognition that African music is getting.
Yeah.
But then we go deeper, right? We got a deep dive into the revenue, the market dynamics from Pulse Nigeria. Then we've got some policy recommendations from a World Bank blog post. And then, just to kind of round things off, get us situated, we got some really helpful lists just giving us an overview of those popular genres, and then the influential labels that are kind of pushing this whole thing forward.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really good 360-degree view, I think, of what's happening.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
So really, our kind of mission today, right, is to really understand this global explosion of African music. Like, what are the core reasons behind it, right?
Yes.
Explore the opportunities, the challenges, right? All the good and the bad that come with this kind of rapid growth.
Yeah.
And ultimately what it means for the future of, music and, most importantly for you, the listener.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Let's start by looking at how perceptions of Africa in the music industry have evolved, because it's a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah. I mean, what's so interesting is the contrast between some of these outdated viewpoints and the reality that we're seeing today, right? I mean, Monique Maddie has this really eye-opening anecdote. She talks about a conversation with a tech executive who just completely dismissed Africa as, a viable market, right?
Yeah.
Just completely dismissed it. And then there was another executive who, he saw the continent purely as a source to extract.
Yeah.
Just take that raw musical material,
Right.
but no intention at all
Right.
of investing in the ecosystem, right? So
It's so short-sighted.
it is. It's crazy,
Right.
particularly when you consider the, sheer demographic weight of Africa, right?
Right.
I mean, Maddie points out by 2050, like literally 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African.
Kind
So that is a huge demographic shift with I think massive implications.
Right. And thankfully those, older stereotypes, they're starting to kind of fade away, right? Maddie talks about these smart companies that are really starting to recognize, Africa's potential.
Yeah.
Not just as a market, but really as like a cultural powerhouse.
Yeah. And we're seeing like real world examples of this in advertising.
Yeah. That's right.
Like even the NFL,
Right.
Their Super Bowl ad was directly targeting African audiences. I mean, who would have predicted that, a few years back?
No way.
So it really underscores how the narrative has completely flipped, right?
Right.
From ignoring Africa to like actively seeking connecting with its growing influence. And right now, that influence arguably is most powerfully expressed through its music, right?
Yeah, totally.
When African music has stepped onto the global stage
Absolutely.
in a big way.
Yeah.
And we're seeing like genres like Afrobeats, which have originated in Nigeria with its infectious rhythms.
Yeah.
Amapiano from South Africa, a unique blend of, house, Kwaito, local sounds.
And then coupe décalé from Côte d'Ivoire.
Right.
These are no longer confined to like regional charts, right? They're resonating with listeners worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah.
And they're climbing those global charts.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And the key part of this story is how, African artists are now able to reach these audiences, right? These international audiences. I mean, streaming platforms and social media have been absolute game changers.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. They've essentially dismantled the traditional gatekeepers and the barriers that African artists previously faced when trying to, get their music heard across borders.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a crucial point. And both Maddie's article and the CNBC Africa report, they both emphasize this.
Yeah, they do.
It's that borderless nature, right? Of these platforms that have really empowered artists
Absolutely.
to share their creativity so widely.
Yeah.
And really effectively bypass some of the historical biases.
Yeah, the hurdles, the logistical hurdles.
Yeah. And we've seen like really incredible real world examples of this globalization in action.
Oh, yeah, tons.
Right. I mean, the collaboration between Rima, the Nigerian artist, and Selena Gomez.
Oh, calm down.
Calm Down. That's a perfect illustration. I mean, that track wasn't just a hit in Africa.
Right.
Right. It achieved like massive global success.
You did, yeah.
I mean, 11 weeks
11 weeks at the top.
at the top of the IFPI's
The annual chart.
MENA chart, and the streaming numbers are just, I mean, frankly, they're staggering.
Staggering, yeah.
What's really interesting about that collaboration is that it's like a blueprint.
Yeah, yeah.
As Maddie suggests.
It showed the power, I think, of these cross-cultural partnerships.
Wow.
In this case, it was, Universal's Virgin Music Group, right?
Yeah.
And the Nigerian label, Maven Records.
Right.
In and elevating African music to this global audience.
Right.
And I think it's what's so interesting about it is it shows how the infrastructure, the major labels can recognize and amplify that inherent, global appeal of the African sound.
Of the music. And Calm Down is just one example, right? I mean, the African Leadership Magazine article, they remind us that collaborations between African and international artists aren't even new.
No, not at all.
Right. I mean, they highlight pairings like, Miriam Makeba working with Harry Belafonte.
Yeah.
Lady Smith, Black Mambazo, and Paul Simon.
Right. I mean, that's going way back.
Yeah, going back.
But then in more recent times, you've got Burna Boy, right?
Yep.
Collaborating with, such a range of artists, Sia, Justin Bieber. You've got the Kenyan band Saudi Soul working with India Airy.
Right.
You've got Kwesi Arthur from Ghana teaming up with Stormzy from the UK. So it's really, these collaborations not only expand, the fan bases, but they create these really exciting fusions,
of different traditions.
Yeah. So the music is breaking through, right?
Yeah.
Technology is clearly like a major catalyst.
Absolutely, yeah.
But what about like within Africa, what are some of those key platforms that are really fueling this growth on the ground?
Right.
Right.
Well, a standout example is Boomplay.
Okay.
Maddie identifies it as the leading music streaming service across Africa. And its success really comes down to understanding like the nuances of the African market.
Yeah.
Yeah. And their freemium model, right? So users can listen for free with ads.
Yeah.
Or they can pay a subscription for ad free and they get the extra features, but that caters to the diverse economic realities across the continent.
Makes sense. And the ownership structure of Boomplay is pretty strategic.
Oh, it is, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a joint venture, right, between NetEase, which is this huge Chinese internet technology company,
right,
and Transsion Holdings. Now, Transsion Holdings is interesting because they're the parent company behind, big smartphone brands in Africa, like Techno, Infinix.
Wow.
So that deep integration within that whole mobile device ecosystem, I think that's a huge advantage for them.
Yeah, of course. And speaking of mobile technology, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the partnerships with telecommunications companies or telcos.
The telcos, yeah.
Yeah, they're absolutely vital.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to have that connectivity, that internet access for music streaming to even work.
Absolutely, yeah. And the GSMA, they project a pretty significant increase, in mobile subscribers in sub-Saharan Africa by 2025.
Okay.
And you've got, deals like the partnership between, Boomplay and MTN Nigeria, which is offering, bundled streaming and data packages.
Right.
I think that's just directly, contributing to the growth.
Yeah, of course. You need to have that infrastructure in place for people to be able to access the music.
Yeah.
And then, the artists need to be paid.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how are digital payment systems playing a role in ensuring that artists, African artists, get paid?
Yeah, that's huge. And combating, things like piracy.
Right.
I mean, Maddie, she really emphasizes that developing robust digital payment systems, it's critical for artists, to get paid efficiently. And also, just to offer, payment methods that are actually relevant and accessible to local populations. The good news is, global players like Visa and MasterCard, they are making big, investments in that African fintech landscape.
Right.
So that's a really, really positive sign.
Yeah. And it's especially when you consider that, as Maddie points out, a good chunk of those transactions across Africa still happen, like in cash.
Yeah.
So these developments in digital payments, they're really bridging a gap.
Absolutely.
Now let's kind of shift our focus to the growth and recognition, of African music industry, through data and these international, accolades and things.
I mean, this is where the story gets, even more compelling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the CNBC Africa report highlights, I think, a really significant milestone. The Recording Academy, which is, the organization behind the Grammys, they added, a dedicated Best African Music Performance category.
It's huge.
It's huge for the 2024 awards. I mean, that's a powerful statement, I think.
Yeah.
By one of the most, prestigious institutions in the industry.
Absolutely. It's fantastic to see that kind of recognition, right? Oh, yeah.
From such a, globally respected body. And the nominations for the 2024 Grammys, they really underscore that talent.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Like Burna Boy, Asake, Davido, Ira Star, all nominated in different categories. And then you've got, Tyla from South Africa. So it's, it's really exciting. And then, when you look at the financial forecasts, I mean, they're equally impressive.
Yeah.
CNBC Africa, they cite some research predicting this remarkable growth in Africa's annual music streaming revenues.
Yeah.
They're saying it's going to be, more than threefold increase.
Wow.
From $92.9 million in 2021 to a huge $314.6 million by 2026.
Okay.
And then, the World Bank blog, they're even more optimistic. They're forecasting almost $500 million by 2025.
Wow.
So it's,
Yeah, those are big numbers.
They are.
Really, demonstrating the potential.
Yeah.
The economic potential. Yeah.
And it's not just, overall revenue. It's about the tangible benefits for individual artists and creators.
Exactly. And Spotify, their head of music for Sub-Saharan Africa has actually spoken about, the revenue growth that Nigerian and South African artists have experienced on their platform.
Right.
So, for instance, revenues generated by Nigerian artists on Spotify increased by, like 50%.
Wow.
Between 2021 and 2022.
Wow.
And South African artists experienced this threefold increase over a 4-year period. So that's, that really shows that that global streaming is becoming a viable income source for these musicians.
Yeah, that's concrete evidence. But it seems like the music market within Africa itself, it's got its own kind of nuances, right?
Absolutely.
And dynamics.
Yeah.
And the Pulse Nigeria article kind of shed some light on that.
It does, yeah. And what's so interesting is that, while Nigeria has this very large and vibrant music industry,
Right.
with tons of artists, hit songs breaking through,
Yeah.
South Africa actually currently leads in terms of overall revenue generation.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's attributed to several factors, So they've got a more established and efficient royalty collection system.
Okay.
The government is really actively trying to combat piracy.
Mm-hmm.
They've got, strong support for local music through funding
Right.
and airplay quotas,
Right.
radio and television.
So it's not just about the sheer number of artists
No, it's not just the volume.
or the popular songs, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's about that underlying infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
It's got to be there.
And the policies that kind of support the artists.
Support. Yeah.
And Pulse Nigeria also provided this really interesting ranking of the top African countries by music revenue.
Yeah.
So, obviously South Africa's at the top.
At the top. Yeah.
But then you've got Egypt, Nigeria,
Yeah.
Zimbabwe, Morocco,
Right.
Kenya, all kind of
Yeah. They're all contributing.
making those contributions.
Yeah. And then we can't overlook the overall growth,
Right.
for the region. I mean, the IFTI, their global music report for 2024 highlighted a 24.7% revenue growth
Oh.
for sub-Saharan Africa as a whole.
That's huge.
It's really impressive. And a big chunk of that, 24.5% is driven by that increase in paid streaming.
Right.
So it really underscores, the dynamic nature of the market.
Absolutely. So while the trajectory is obviously upward, right?
Yeah.
Are there any big challenges
Yeah.
that still need to be addressed
Oh yeah, for sure.
to make sure this growth is sustainable?
I mean, the CNBC Africa article, they raise a really good point about, the careers that are just fueled by viral moments on social media.
Right.
While social media is great, right?
Yeah.
It offers this unprecedented reach, for artists.
Yeah.
But just relying on those, fleeting trends, it might not be, it might not give them that solid foundation.
Right. Right.
For a long-lasting career.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You need more than just a catchy tune.
Yeah. You need the infrastructure.
Yeah.
You need the support. You need
Right.
the investment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the World Bank blog,
Yeah.
they actually offer some really great strategies,
Yeah, they do.
right, to help support that continued growth.
Yeah. They kind of outline 6 key areas
Okay.
where policymakers can focus.
Yeah.
So first is creating more equitable access to finance. So traditional financial institutions, they often, they see the music industry as high risk.
Yeah.
So initiatives like, Afrexim Bank, they have this creative industry support fund.
Okay.
And then, innovative funding platforms like PopRev, they're trying to bridge that gap
Wait. Yeah.
and provide that capital.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What's number 2?
So number 2 is investing in music-friendly policies.
Right.
So that's things like providing adequate, performance spaces.
Right.
Investing in music education, training programs,
Yes.
ensuring that artists have access to equipment, all that kind of stuff. But really importantly, it's enforcing intellectual property rights.
Right.
Combating piracy. And a good example of that is Kenya.
Right.
Kenya's national music policy.
Okay.
They've got a digital copyright, licensing system.
Yeah.
They've got mandated local airplay quotas. So it's a really good model.
That's really interesting. Okay.
So then, number 3 is actively supporting that networking and collaboration, within the industry.
Right.
Through these industry associations, platforms
Yeah.
like Music in Africa, the African Music Export Office, BIMA.
Yeah.
So these organizations, they play a really vital role in connecting different stakeholders, facilitating that sharing of resources,
Yeah.
and just promoting African music, globally.
Yeah. Okay.
So number 4 is about increasing the participation
Right.
of women and artists from marginalized communities.
Of course.
So the World Bank blog,
Yeah.
they actually highlight initiatives like Gender at Work, the Southern African Disabled Musicians Association.
Okay.
So they're, providing training, resources, advocacy for these underrepresented groups.
Right. Okay.
So number 5 is about, prioritizing that development of internet infrastructure.
Right.
And the communication technology.
Right, because without that.
Across the continent. Yeah. I mean, while the fintech sector is growing,
Right.
Inadequate ICT infrastructure can hinder, equitable access to streaming platforms and other digital opportunities. I mean, even in a market like Nigeria, which is, such a high revenue market with better infrastructure, you could have, much greater user penetration.
Right. Makes sense. And lastly.
And lastly is, promoting that human capital development.
Yeah.
Through these training programs.
Right.
So a good example of that is the Music Business Academy for Africa.
Right.
And these initiatives, they're giving young people the business skills they need to navigate and succeed in the music industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course. And what's so interesting is the World Bank blog, they actually emphasize that these investments, these strategic investment, they don't just benefit the artists and the industry, but they can also have, positive effects on other sectors.
Right.
Like tourism, for instance, as cities and countries, promote those music scenes to bring in visitors.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a really interesting, holistic, I think, view of the industry's potential.
It's a really interesting perspective. And I mean, collaboration, right?
Yeah.
Feels like a recurring, crucial theme.
Oh, it is, yeah.
Throughout this whole conversation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just about individual artists. Mm-hmm. It's about the power of working together.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. At different levels, across borders.
Yeah. Yeah. Maddie's article even, imagines this dream collaboration between a Taylor Swift,
right,
yeah. and an African giant like Burna Boy, which is highlighting that immense potential, for blending musical traditions,
and as we said earlier, the African Leadership magazine piece, it really underscores those historical and ongoing importance of collaborations, in expanding that global reach.
Before we kind of wrap up, let's briefly touch on the incredible diversity of African music.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, we've got a list here of some of the best-selling, popular genres.
Okay, so let's see. You've got Afrobeats, obviously, coming out of Nigeria.
Yeah.
Just exploding onto the global scene, you know?
Yeah.
They have so infectious rhythms and melodies.
Right.
Then you've got Amapiano from South Africa.
Right.
Which is, it's that blend, that distinctive blend of deep house, Kwaito bass lines, jazzy piano melodies. Mm-hmm. And that's really gaining international recognition as well. And of course, hip hop, rap, hugely popular across the continent. Mm-hmm. Vibrant, diverse, local scenes.
Right.
And then you've got, Kwaito, which is this pioneering South African electronic dance music genre.
Yeah.
And then, you've got religious music, which is, consistently popular, culturally significant. So it's
and behind all of this creativity, right, are these record labels.
Oh yeah, the labels, right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. You sent me some info on Gala Records in South Africa. It goes all the way back to 1926.
Whoa, that's ancient.
I know. Almost 100 years in the music business. That's got to be significant.
Yeah, Gala's story is like a window into how this whole thing has evolved. The fact that they've not only survived but thrived for so long says a lot about the power of music from this region and their ability to adapt. I mean, they partnered with Warner Music Group. That's huge.
Global, yeah.
Now you've got Black Coffee involved. It shows that this industry has got deep roots. It's built to last.
Wow. Okay, so from the old school to a more recent powerhouse, Maven Records. Founded in 2012 by Don Jazzy, it seems like they've got a real knack for finding the next big thing. Their roster is packed with stars. What's their secret sauce?
Yeah, Maven is interesting. They just keep finding these artists who blow up, both in Africa and worldwide. Don Jazzy, I think he's got this amazing ear for talent, He knows what's going to work.
A hit maker.
Yeah, and they're super smart about using digital platforms, building their brand. Look at Rima, Iris Star. They've gone global so fast.
It's a whole different game now.
Right. It's like Maven's cracked the code for how to build a successful label in Africa today.
Then we have this label called Taranga Beat. They're like musical explorers digging for those hidden treasures in Senegal. What's their role in all of this?
Well, the African music scene's about way more than just global hits. Karenga Beat, they're dedicated to these regional sounds, these traditions that might not be on everyone's radar.
Yeah, keeping it real.
They're making sure that all this incredible musical heritage, all this diversity doesn't get lost in the shuffle. They're preserving something really special.
So important. And speaking of regional scenes, South Africa seems like it's always been this breeding ground for new genres. And Kalawa Jazmee, they're credited with playing a huge role in developing kwaito and house music there.
Yeah.
How big of an impact did they have?
Oh, they're huge. They were right there at the start of this whole movement, giving a voice to a generation after apartheid. Kwaito became the soundtrack for a whole new era. And Kalawa Jazmee, they were the ones pushing it forward, laying the groundwork for so much of the music that came after, like house and electronic music.
They really shaped the sound of South Africa.
Yeah, totally.
And then we jump over to Kenya. We see Caliph Records nurturing all these different artists, and Lynx Entertainment in Ghana, they're focused on hip life, hip hop, R&B. I'm seeing a pattern here. These regional powerhouses, they really know their audience.
That's it. They're in tune with what people want to hear, what's going to resonate locally. And they're often blending those global genres with their own unique sounds, languages, creating something fresh. Like Lynx Entertainment, their success shows how much people in West Africa are craving this modern urban sound.
Yeah, it's like a local and global thing all mixed up.
Exactly.
And then you have Ambitious Entertainment in South Africa. They seem to have their finger on the pulse of what's hot right now.
Oh, yeah. They're all over hip-hop and Amapiano, which are massive in South Africa right now. They just keep churning out hit after hit. It shows just how vibrant these genres are, how much potential they have.
They're riding the wave.
For sure.
Chocolate City in Nigeria is another big name. Founded by lawyers, which is interesting. They even partnered with Warner Music Group at one point. And their list of artists, past and present, is incredible. It's like a who's who of Nigerian music.
Yeah, Chocolate City is a great example of how an African label can build something big, attract global attention, even investment. It's like the industry's coming of age. And their success, it's a testament to the sheer talent coming out of Nigeria.
Yeah, so many incredible artists.
So many.
And we have Chandarana Records in Kenya, adding to their musical legacy. And then Kina Music in Rwanda, they've actually shaped the entire national music scene. That's serious influence.
Yeah, it shows you the power of these local labels. Even if they're smaller, they can still make a huge difference. Kina Music, they're not just releasing music, they're building a movement, giving Rwandan artists a platform.
That's so inspiring.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the labels, the people behind the scenes. Now let's get to the music itself. Afrobeats, we can't talk about African music without it. For someone who might not be super familiar, what is it? What makes it so special?
Well, at its core, Afrobeats is all about these rhythms, really upbeat, infectious.
Makes you want to move.
Exactly. It draws on all these West African traditions like highlife and juju. It's got these catchy melodies, these complex percussion patterns, and the lyrics, they're often a mix of local languages and Nigerian pidgin English. I think what's made it so popular worldwide is that it's just got this feel-good energy. It's perfect for dancing. It crosses all these cultural boundaries.
It's happy music.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, then you've got Amapiano, which you said is South African. It's like a fusion of sounds, right?
Yeah.
Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, Amapiano is its own thing, and it's still evolving. It takes elements of deep house, kwaito, jazz, even lounge music. It's got this signature log drum, bass line, shakers, synth that create this spacious, atmospheric vibe. And then you've often got these soulful or jazzy piano melodies running through it. Compared to Afrobeats, it's a little more laid back, more groove-focused. Yeah, but still super catchy, and it's gained a huge following because it's so distinctive, so sophisticated sounding.
Yeah, it's different. Okay, and of course we got to talk about hip hop and rap. It's everywhere in Africa. I bet it's got its own unique flavor there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. African hip-hop artists, they've taken what's global and made it their own. They're rapping about their own experiences, their communities, using their languages.
Yeah.
And the beats often have this traditional African influence, like rhythms and melodies woven in. It's a really dynamic scene, always changing, always reflecting what's going on across the continent.
So diverse. The sources also talk about kwaito, how important it was, and then there's religious music.
Yeah.
It's such a huge part of the culture. Maybe it doesn't always get the spotlight it deserves internationally.
No, you're right. It's huge. Religious music has this massive audience across Africa. It's woven into people's lives. You've got gospel, contemporary Christian music, all kinds of styles. It's got its own stars, its own industry. It's really powerful.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so looking forward, the sources seem pretty optimistic, especially about Afrobeats and Amapiano continuing to grow globally.
Wow.
What needs to happen to make sure that momentum keeps going?
They highlight a few key things. Digital infrastructure's got to keep improving so people can stream music easily. And we got to keep investing in artists, nurturing that talent.
Developing it.
Exactly. And protecting creators, their intellectual property, that's crucial. And then just creating a better business environment for the music industry across Africa.
It's a whole ecosystem.
It is.
And at the end of the day, the foundation of all of this, it's the music itself, right? The incredible diversity of genres. That's what makes it so special.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's that mix of deep musical traditions and the fresh energy of new artists. That's the magic formula. That's what's drawing people in.
Yeah, it's irresistible.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's safe to say the African music industry is way more than just on the rise. It's a force. It's got deep roots, all these incredible genres, these powerful labels driving it forward, and it's having a huge impact on the world.
It's reshaping the global scene. It's really exciting to see.
Totally. And this leaves me with a question for you, our listener. With all this going on, all this history, all this momentum, what do you think is going to come next? What crazy new sounds, what unexpected collaborations, what new fusions are going to come out of the African music scene?
Ooh, good question.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This is Afrotake Article and Conversation, powered by Brand Blended Media. Check out more articles at afrotake.com.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was.